I want to thank everybody for coming out to the Museum of History and Industry tonight. My name is Feliks Banel. I'm the Deputy Director of the museum, and tonight we're here to mark the 25th anniversary of the Sonics NBA World Championship. So we'll spend the next hour or so chatting about memories from that 78-79 season and talk about the current NBA and maybe the future of the NBA, as well as the impact of that big night, June 1st, 1979, on Seattle and the whole Puget Sound region. Now let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. Standing immediately to my left and to your right is Greg Heberlein, who was with the Seattle Times for about 32 years.
Correct.
And who covered the Sonics in that championship season, and also retired a few years ago in the business section, and who actually, we'll find out a little bit about this later, played for the Sonics briefly many years ago. Next on the panel is Bob Blackburn, who's the legendary voice of the Seattle Sonics, and who, along with Leo Lassen and Dave Niehaus, I think is probably one of the three most recognizable voices in this area, if not much of the Northwest or the West Coast. And last but not least, John Johnson, who, of course, is known better as JJ, who played for the Sonics as well as played for the Portland Trail Blazers and the Houston Rockets. So maybe we just get to go ahead and get started. Just what your favorite memory or what your fondest memory of that championship season was. Is there one particular moment that stands out, and why?
I think it was the opportunity I had to make JJ a star that year.
Here we go.
Well, I had to get that one in before he got me, because JJ, the first thing he's going to say was, Blackburn, I made a star out of you.
No, not only you.
Get up to your microphone.
Not only you. A bunch of guys, including Greg, because he didn't have no juicy quotes until he talked to me. I would make him wait. I'll be the last one to interview with him.
My favorite memory, I think that year, or the most visible memory that I bring back, besides Gus throwing the ball in the air in Landover, was Game 6 in Phoenix when Seattle was down 3-2 and had to win. And I believe they were behind by as much as 13 in the third quarter and 8 at the end of the third quarter. And that was a game where I know Paul Silas was a big factor, and he played 30 minutes that day, which was one of his longest stints of the season. And, of course, Seattle came back and won that, went on to win the title.
JJ, I want to ask you a question about that game, because I have often said that was the day the Sonics won the championship. It was when Garfield's Herd's shot did not go in. Had it gone in, they would have been playing instead of you guys. I still feel that you won the championship that day. How do you feel?
Well, I have a tendency to agree with you, Bob, because that was a defining moment. When we won that game, that brought everybody's confidence back up, because when you're down 3-2 and you got to go on the road, and Phoenix was a problematic team for us because they gave Jack Sigma a lot of problems, and we had matchups, and they spread the floor, and they were a good shooting ball club. But that game there, I think we redeemed ourselves, and from then on it was smooth sailing.
Greg, I don't know how you feel about it, but I think one of my great memories of the year was not an individual moment, but it kind of solidified something I've been saying ever since, is that offense wins ball games, but defense wins championships. And I remember the Sonics that year, all season long, they kept winning ball games with defense.
Well, it was like they had enough offense to win most of the games, but they needed that special defense. You just don't see teams, you don't even see very many teams today who play defense the way the Sonics did. Some people slow the ball down. That's their version of defense. But the Sonics played just incredible defense.
Can any of you folks in the audience tell me who had the most assists on the team that year? Would anybody want to venture a guess? Who? This guy here? JJ, you're right. He was the first point forward in the NBA, and he had 48 more assists than Gus Williams, who was the point guard that year.
His average was 4.4, which was the team lead, and he had 13 assists late in the season, which was the single game high.
But back to defense for a moment. What allowed us to really be a good defensive team? First of all, we had a lot of intelligent players, and we had super quickness and our guards, and Gus Williams and Dennis Johnson, who was not only good on the ball defensive player, but he could also block shots. And then I had speed of a turtle, but I had great anticipation.
Very fast turtle, though.
So we could extend our defense out to full court. And a lot of pro teams, they couldn't handle the pressure and the traps. And we caught them off guard, and all of a sudden, we might be down 2. In another minute and a half, we're up 8, 10 points. And the ball game, the momentum had completely turned around.
I think you had 2 guys, DJ and JJ, who put defense above all else most of the time. And then you had a bunch of other guys who kind of followed suit. It was almost like a disease. It became a very important point for them. And you also had a coaching staff that recognized the skills of these people and used them to the fullest.
Greg, I thought, too, on that team, and JJ, I don't know how you feel about it, great starting 5, but to me, you also had some great guys coming off the bench with special roles, and they all seemed to know what their role was, and when they came into the game, that was what they concentrated on. Paul Silas concentrated on the boards and defense. Wally Walker, he concentrated on getting some quick baskets, things like that.
No, that's totally true, Bob. All the guys had special roles, even the starting 5. With my ball handling skills, teams really couldn't press us or pressure us because we get the ball off the board, and instead of me taking off, my number 1 responsibility was to get the ball, and our guards took off. And we got a lot of easy buckets in transition. And then Freddie Brown come in the game, he just go stand over in the corner and wait for something to develop. And the fans, he'd be there so long, the fans have to beg him to shoot the ball.
Tell us about Freddie Brown's defense, JJ.
Freddie.
Well, you always have some pretty good comments on that.
We're playing the Washington Bullets, I believe. Well, we were playing them. And Bernie Bickerstaff, who coached up here in a few years past, he told Phil Chenier, one of the guards, he says, take the Matador. But in all fairness to Freddie now, he wasn't noted for defense. But at the same time, he put a lot of pressure on you because if he got that ball, he had a great opportunity to score. He was going to score for you.
Well, you needed an instant offense kind of guy sometimes. I mean, that was very important, and you didn't mind giving up a little defense once in a while. Bob said something I think may have stepped over the line.
Uh-oh.
I thought we weren't using the 2 words Wally Walker tonight.
Well, who said that? www.com, WallyWalkerWas.com. One thing I would like to, I don't know whether you remember this, and JJ's probably heard this story. A lot of you remember the championship the year before when the Sonics lost to Washington. And remember one of the things that day was DJ went 0 for 14. Well, the next year, when the Washington Bullets played there for, I believe it was in late October, early November, they had a game out at the Kingdome. And the trainer for the Washington Bullets, I forgot his name. You remember his name? He was quite a guy, but he was a real character and everything. Dennis comes down in the first quarter, takes a shot from the right corner, right in front of their bench, and the trainer yells out, "DJ, that's 0 for 15." Loud enough, of course, so a lot of people could hear it. Were you on the court when he did that? And then he went up to about 0 for 18, and Dennis finally got a basket.
Yeah, that hurt us, but I just think the inexperience. We came out of the dark, the tunnel, in the dark, 5 and 17, and we expended so much energy getting off the ground, then getting above 500. Then we started believing we were a good team. Then the fans started believing we were a good team, and the coaching staff, and it was like everybody in the state was just so happy to say we're going to the NBA Finals, instead of saying we're going to win the NBA Finals. and Lenny, I thought, was a little generous with playing time with too many people. And when you get to those big games, you got to shorten your rotation. You know, you want everybody to get an opportunity to play, but you got to play the guys who's getting it done for you.
You're talking about Lenny and putting guys in and maybe letting him stay too long. Remember the final game against Phoenix at the Kingdome before you guys went on to play Washington? And you guys had about, you probably remember this, Greg, they had about a 14 or 15-point lead and about 2 minutes to play. And so Lenny started clearing the bench, putting some of the guys in that hadn't played very much. And those two guards, Westfall and who was the other guy? Who? Yeah, Boozy, Don Boozy. Those two guys got real hot. And they brought the team back, and finally the Sonics, they won the ball game, and I think we all knew they were going to win it. But they won it by 4 points. Now, afterwards, in the room that they have for where the players and the wives and the press and stuff would congregate after the ball game, Marilyn Wilkins, Lenny's wife, was in there. And I'll never forget, my wife and I, Lenny walked through the door. Marilyn walked up to him, looked him right in the face, and she said, "Don't you ever do that again."
Yeah.
That's just one of the moments off the record.
What was it like going from the Coliseum in the 77-78 season into the Kingdome for the 78-79 season?
What was that now?
What was it like moving to the Kingdome from the relatively small Coliseum to the huge, cavernous Kingdome?
Well, we'll let JJ answer that as a player. You had a lot more people yelling for you.
Yeah, once they finally got it set up, it was pretty comfortable. And like Bob said, we led the league in attendance that year with over 20-some thousand.
At least, yeah, because you had some crowds in there of 32 and 33, and I think the biggest one was probably about 42, wasn't it?
I don't remember the high, but what I remember from looking up some of the numbers was early, Game 2, there were only 17,000 in there, which was the smallest of the year. Then they went on to get 18 crowds of greater than 20,000, and the average was a little over 20.
You guys wouldn't have scored in that year for the crowd size.
But as far as
it's like the Mariners and
as far as the Coliseum, personally, I felt that we always had a distinct advantage, what you call home court, because the crowd just went bunkers in there, especially in the latter part of the third period, or midway through the fourth quarter, after we had made a big rally, and during the playoffs, it was just, we had to use hand signals because you couldn't hear anything. It was so deafening. Then you had this big guy who I never met personally, but the Weedle, he walked around with the University of Washington cheerleaders and the drums, and it was just like, you felt like there was going to be an earthquake come trembling down.
What about you, Bob, as a broadcaster in the different venues?
Well, the Kingdome obviously was probably a little bit easier to broadcast from, for the reason that the crowd didn't overpower me as a broadcaster. I mean, sometimes at the Coliseum, it got so loud. I remember one night, of course, it wasn't me, but it was Slick Watts. I forget what he was doing. He was, I forget whether it was Slick after he had got through playing or something, but he was doing some commentary or something with somebody, not me, but somebody. And all I remember him, a great quote of his, he said on here, he said, "It's so loud," he said, "in here I can't hear my ears." and it kind of would make me kind of feel that same way. I mean, you'd get overpowered by the sound, and you didn't know whether the people could understand or hear you, because I do go back to some of the tapes of some of those games I had, and the crowd did overpower the broadcaster at times, but hey, so what? It made the fans out there in Radio Land feel a lot better because they were part of that, guys, the people yelling too.
Yeah. What about you, Greg?
Well, from my writing standpoint, it didn't make any difference, but except we were a little bit farther away from the paper. But certainly the cavernous nature of the Kingdome hurt the Sonics' ability to just vocally crush an opponent. And I think, they lost some key games in there. I remember that one game where Freddie missed the shot late in the game in the playoffs, in the 78 playoffs.
Right.
And you thought, Well, you don't have the same home court advantage. On the other hand, Seattle lost that series to the Bullets, lost the championship to the Bullets on their home court in the Coliseum.
Right.
So it didn't always work that way. But it did seem like the club had a little better advantage when they were in the Coliseum than when they're in the
How much
Dome.
does the crowd really affect you guys out there, JJ? I mean, can they do what us guys as writers and the fans feel like the crowd does and really gets you guys going?
Oh, sure. You know, it's like a momentum effect. You know, the crowds start getting crazy, and the players want to, you know, do well for the crowd, and it's just the opposite on the road. You want to jump up your opponent early so you can keep the crowd out of the game, because when you got a tight place that's really loud and boisterous, it can really help you in making the other team turn the ball over, not being able to execute their plays, not hear what's going on, and it takes another team out of their comfort zone when the crowd's really into the game.
Was there a place that was particularly tough to play on the road in those years?
Well, when we played, you know, there was usually a full house everywhere, but naturally, you know, right off the bat, I don't know, what would you say, Bob?
I tell you what, for the championship team that year, I don't think there was a tough place on the road.
Yeah.
Didn't you feel that way?
I changed my mind.
I really felt that way about the team and the way they could play on the road and win on the road.
Phoenix,
I don't know, Greg, how about you? What's your opinion on
Phoenix
that?
Phoenix would have been tough.
It was tough.
Yeah, but I think that Seattle had the ability to put down a team so quickly that it short-circuited the fans. You know, they would take the fans out of the game so often. You know, except that Phoenix was loud. There were a couple places that were loud, but
Well, and
Phoenix,
like
Boston.
like JJ said, though, Phoenix, they were a tough team to match up with that year, with you guys, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was part of the problem with Phoenix. But you know, it wasn't that year, but I've got to have JJ tell you the story about Kansas City. One night he was on my post-game show, and he did something that nobody in the NBA has ever done before, since, or anything like that. What did you do that night, JJ?
I made you a star.
I realize that, but what did you actually do?
I interviewed you. I told people on the airwaves that you were a great tennis player, and I'll spot you 6 game, beat you 6-love.
How did you get my microphone?
I don't remember.
He took it away from me. He came out and he grabbed it. He said, Blackburn, he says, you're always doing the interviewing. He said, it's about time somebody asked you some questions. And he took off. It was kind of a cute story. He did a pretty good job interviewing.
Who had the biggest ego on the championship team?
Uh-oh. On the championship team?
Not including the broadcasters, of course.
If I say anything like that, it would get to whoever it was, and the next morning I'd have a shiv in my rib.
We really didn't have guys with big egos. And we had a great mix of individuals. That we had some young bucks and DJ Sigma, Gus, Wally. Then you had some graybeards and Silas, Autry, Dick Snyder, Freddie Brown, myself. So we had a good blend. I don't think Seattle could ever put a team together like that, because we were like we were an odd group, because we didn't fit the pieces of the puzzle that you would say this is the championship ingredients, because I was basically the point guard, and Gus was basically a shooting guard, and we had guys that had one common factor, and that was about winning. And we got thirsty for it. The fans got thirsty for it. And we had guys, the older guys, we were like the lieutenants, and the younger guys were the soldiers. And we didn't try to step on their toes, because they was going to be featured more in the offense. They was going to score most of the points. They was going to get most of the publicity in the newspapers and the airwaves, because all of us guys had made all-star teams before, and the only thing we wanted to do was win. We didn't care if there was bold letters, Sigmund scores 25, just as long as the Sonics won.
Feliks, you mentioned the word ego, and Greg, I'd like you to second, not necessarily second my motion, but the way I've felt about, the way I've always felt about the NBA or professional athletes, they all have an ego. They have to have an ego. Now, how they control that ego, to me, is what makes the difference between championship ball clubs and others. Because if they all control their ego properly, then I feel that the chemistry on the ball club is what gets them through. Greg, how do you feel?
Well, I think that's a good observation. I like to think of it in terms of they all did have egos. Even the number 12 player on the bench would have an ego and want to play. But they weren't kind of obstructive egos most of the time. Secondly, I like to think of them as personalities. You know, there were a handful of people who you could count on most of the time to be civil to you, to chat with you as a reporter. And there were a few that were a little distant, and maybe sometimes they were willing to chat, sometimes they weren't. JJ and Paul Silas were, I guess I'd call them the two greatest human beings on that ball club, because no matter how bad things got, if they just blew a big lead and it was their fourth straight loss on the road, it didn't matter. Those two guys invariably would give you a minute of their time when they knew that your job was to try to reflect what happened, and that they would be best represented if they spoke to you. So that's the way I like to think of it.
I wonder how many times that year it was almost like they were trying to see who could do it the most. Fred Brown, Dennis Johnson, and Gus Williams. When I would ask them to go on a post-game show, they'd send the word out with the cop, "Tell Blackburn I'm in the shower already." So I wound up with a lot of second choices on those three guys.
Well, this is a moment when I'd like to bring up something that always interested me about that team. You know, the team, we have this view that they sort of almost won every game and won the title, and that, of course, wasn't the case. They lost a lot of games. Their starting center at the start of the season, Tom Lagarde, was injured in the 23rd game, never played again. Lonnie Shelton, the player they got from New York, didn't arrive till almost day one of the season, had no chance to go through training camp. In December, Gus Williams got sick, and Lonnie suffered a sprained ankle. The team lost 6 games during that span. Later on, Freddie got hurt late in the season and missed 16 games, I think, or I can't remember if it was days or games. But anyway, he lost a lot of time. So there were bad things. As good as the players were most of the time, there was one player, Dennis Johnson, who I think had something of a manic issue. Some days he would be very friendly with you, and some days he would be very unfriendly with you. And it didn't seem to matter whether you were a player or a teammate or a broadcaster or a coach. And I'm sure many of you recall that when Lenny traded him to Phoenix about a year later, that he said he had ridded the team of a cancer. And I think none of us understood at that time what issues were troubling Dennis. And I think it became obvious a couple of years later when he went to Boston that whatever those issues were, he either found help for himself or somebody helped him, or somehow he resolved a lot of those problems, I assume, because he certainly had a great career after that. There were times during that season when players would throw up their hands and say that they couldn't deal with Dennis anymore. You know, so there were. It wasn't all smooth and sweet all year long, but it was pretty good.
Well, lots of stuff has changed in the last 25 years here in Seattle, and I guess I want to hear from each of you how you describe how Seattle has changed using basketball as a comparison, or looking at that year and the city's reaction and the region's reaction to that championship, and things that have happened in the meantime in terms of how the population's changed and just how the feel of the city has changed. So more the cultural side of the sport rather than the actual game part of it.
Well, when the Sonics won the title, the Seahawks were like 3 years old. The Mariners were like 2 years old. So on the sports front, there really wasn't. The Sonics were the thing, and deserved to be the thing. Now the city's a lot bigger. It's probably more cosmopolitan. There's a greater demand for the entertainment dollar, and I think teams have to work extra hard, even harder today than they did back then, to be competitive enough to attract those dollars.
I think the dollars are so big now, too. I don't care what sport it is. If you don't have a winning team, you're not going to draw too well. I mean, money's become a huge thing. Hasn't it, JJ? Wouldn't you like to be playing ball now?
Wake me up. I tell you.
You're just born too soon.
No, but I always have people come up to me and say, well, JJ, you was born 15 years too soon. But you look at the history of the game, it's all relevant. You look at the great players like Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Will Chamberlain, Bill Russell. What they make. They probably, at the tail end of their career, they're lucky if they made $175,000, $200,000. I came in the league as a rookie, making $150,000 a year. So it's all relevant, with inflation and stuff. But the market, the game has changed so much and becomes it's an international game now, and there's so much commercial market that's involved in the game, and ESPN and television revenue, and that's where a lot of that money come from. Back when we were playing, it wasn't there.
Somebody recently, and Greg, maybe you probably read this too, and I forget whose column it was or what players they were talking about, but it was being aimed at some of the young players that are in the NBA now, and they said those kids don't know anything about the history of the NBA or what went ahead of them, and they don't know enough to really appreciate it. Do you feel that way?
Oh, totally. You get most of these young kids, they probably tell you they never heard of Oscar Robertson or some of the John Havlicek or Dave DeBusschere, some of the great players. They'll tell you Dr. J, but people who's not a basketball purist have a tendency to forget Dr. J copied his game from Connie Hawkins, and Connie, by the time he got to the NBA, he started he became injury prone, and he had money guaranteed from a lawsuit from the ABA. So people remember Dr. J. They don't even remember Elgin Baylor. But kids now, and it's understandable because, first of all, mentally, most of them don't go to school for 3 years or 4 years. Socially, they're not ready to adapt to society because they're still too young and immature, and they're easily to be gullible and misled. And they think that they invented basketball. They're the greatest thing that ever happened. But it's just like, the better you know your personnel, it's easier to make adjustments. The better you know the history of your subject matter, is easier to translate it onto someone else.
Greg, you're a great writer. I mean, really, this man, I like the stories he wrote because he was so honest, and I mean, he covered the game so well. He wasn't one of these guys that was always looking for the negative. But how do you feel about what has happened in the NBA? A lot of people say that the ESPN highlight films at night have kind of perpetrated the thing where the young kids are so anxious to do things one-on-one, in other words, be individual stars to get on the highlight show and things like that. Do you have some comments on that?
Well, certainly that must be true. You see it a lot, but to me, one of the big elements is something that JJ just touched on was you got 18-year-olds going to the NBA, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds. In the old days, everybody had to be 21, 22, 23. Well, that extra couple of years can make a big difference in maturity, in knowing what it takes to win a ball game rather than maybe miss a dunk. There's just so many ways that those extra years factor in, and I guess I'm saddened that so many young kids are now allowed to come out. I understand the economics. I understand that if you're from a poor family or even a rich family and somebody's going to offer you millions, it might be better to take it when you can still walk than a few years later when maybe you get injured or something. But still, I regret it.
Do you feel it's affected the game itself quite a bit?
I don't know about quite a bit. It's affected the game. I can't say whether it's been an overwhelming factor.
Sure, it has affected the game because, like I alluded to earlier, these kids come out, they're not fundamentally sound, and they're not ready. Most of them are not ready to play. LeBron James was an exception. Carmelo Anthony was an exception. But most of these kids that come out, they're not ready to play. They're not ready for the grind. They're not ready for the physical punishment. But another thing I like to bring up, I think has affected the game, is that three-point line and the one-on-one defense. Now everybody's switching everything and talking about a rotation. And the NBA is a copycat league, so everybody's doing it. But why switch on a guy 30, 40 feet from the basket? Plus, these guys, majority of these guys nowadays, can't shoot. They can't shoot. I was watching the game before I came over here tonight. Detroit and Indiana. Detroit was shooting 17%. I could do that. I could do that on my knees in the bathtub. And let's be realistic. Look at the Sonics roster. And everybody think Ray Allen's a great shooter, but you look at his field goal percentage. You look at Freddie's field goal percentage, and Dale Ellis, and those guys are great shooters. But you can't tell me you're shooting 41, 42%. You're a great shooter. You may be a great scorer, but you're not a great shooter.
Okay, JJ, answer me this question then. I did a study one time looking at the early years in the NBA, back in the late 40s and the 50s, and the championship teams of those years, their shooting percentage would be 29, 31, 32%. Now, the championship teams and a lot of the teams are shooting 49 and 50 and 51%. So when you say the guys can't shoot anymore, somebody's got to be putting the ball through the hoop with those percentages.
Bob, you were being misled by once again, I might add, by the evolution of the game. The 24-second clock was instituted to speed up the game. Guys start shooting jump shots. You had bigger the human beings got bigger and started opening up the 3-second lane. And then you had the entertainment factor where you had to score because the fans didn't want to go watch a soccer game. They wanted to go watch a basketball game. And nowadays, the game has changed again. When I came in the league, you could hand check a guy. You could ride the guy like a little pony. Now, you can't impede his progress with nothing if he's going to the basket. So the game has changed. It's just all part of the evolution of the game.
I think there are a couple other factors, too. In the early days of the game, there was almost a philosophy. The offensive philosophy was throw the puck in and get the rebound. It was they just shot like crazy as often, as quickly. That's why you had guys getting 30 and 40 and 50 rebounds a game in those days. Secondly, I think the quality of the athlete has improved immeasurably. I think that's another big difference.
Yeah, that's true. But the one thing One thing hasn't changed. Most of these players nowadays are not smart. They don't make intelligent decisions. And that's why when you got some smart veteran players, they're going to beat the young, upcoming studs every time because they know the game. And they know how to motivate themselves. And, you know, you always hear people in any sport, they're always talking about, we want to win, we want to win. But the sad part of it is they don't know how to win. And so either they'll play selfish or they have other motives for, you know, not joining the rest of the team and going out there and be willing to do the things that's necessary to win.
Why don't you guys answer the question for me? Did Jerry Buss buy a championship for the Lakers, or can Detroit or Indiana beat them? Don't answer me too quickly.
Yeah.
That was a question for both of these guys up here.
Well, Shaquille, he's a difference maker, you know, and what hurt Minnesota was losing Sammy Cassell. And basically that was it, because Minnesota was pretty much in every game, even though they didn't have an answer for Shaquille. And it's going to be the same way with Detroit or Indiana. But Detroit, I think they're defensively tougher than Minnesota. They got more depth than Minnesota. And Detroit, their players represent their town. That's a tough town, and those guys, they're going to respect Shaq and them, but they're going to come at him.
I think JJ said it earlier. You got to know how to win. In '78, the Sonics knew how to win, but we're just missing that little sliver of extra oomph. And the next season, all season long, you could see how losing that final game the year before had affected them in a positive way. Well, the Lakers are going for 4 out of 5. They know how to win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And look at how they played during the year. They were an atrocity for 3/4 of the season. An atrocity. And then you come down to the last 20 games or so, and they turn the light switch on. You always say they can't turn the switch on and off. They turned it on.
How would you rank the Sonics championship with some of the other notable achievements in Seattle sports, like the 1917?
This would be the only one. First of all. Second of all, I mean, think about it. You know, you're almost 100 years since that hockey thing that was sort of an accident. Second of all, you know, someone on a website recently pointed out that Cleveland is the only city that's gone longer without a major championship than Seattle in cities where there are 3 pro sports, 3 major league sports. So I think that's just such a testament to the '79 champions, and it just makes it so much more amazing now. I mean, what if there had been 5 other championships? I don't know if we'd be doing this. Yeah. But I just marvel at that.
I know that year I was on the speaking circuit, about 80 speeches I gave around the state. And I told everybody, I said, enjoy what the Sonics have done this year and enjoy it to its hilt, because I said it probably will be a long time before it ever happens again. Here we are 25 years later, and they're still working it. I mean,
did you think it would be that long?
Well, I tell you, what they did was a wonderful thing. I mean, it's a real defining moment in sports history in Seattle, I think, to take a chance, because the NBA even then, it was a tough league.
Yeah, talk a little bit about NBA, like in 1967 when the Sonics were an expansion team, because you were there as the voice of the Sonics.
Yeah.
So what was it like then? I mean, what did the city think about the team?
It expanded and grew very rapidly. When I first came into the league, the year before, there were only 12 teams in the league. The year I came into the league as a broadcaster in '67, they put Seattle and San Diego in, so there were 14 teams. Now what do you have? 30 teams, I believe, something like that. But it was during the '70s that the NBA really started growing, and then when the ABA sent their teams over and they joined up and with Dr. J and everything, the interest became more and more, and like JJ was also mentioning, the guys are just getting bigger for one thing and faster, I think, because there are more, and so many more of them are working hard as young guys to come in. So I think probably the talent they have now is probably more than we had then. But everything is relative.
I think the athleticism.
Huh?
I think the athleticism is better, But once again, it becomes all relevant. Sonics, for instance, they got two guys they claim is 6'9", 6'10", Rashard Lewis and Radmatovic, but they play like they're 6'4", 6'5". They spot up shooters. If you got that height, you should learn how to play with your back to the basket and take advantage of some of your height. So I think it's all relevant. Plus, I just can't say enough. These guys, the majority of them today, can't shoot, and a lot of them don't have the pride to go out there and get motivated and fight to win. Jerome James, here this guy, he's got a prototype body to be a great center in the league. And it seemed like he takes off, he played one good game, then he takes off 8 games. How can you can't if you're not consistent, you're never going to be a big-time player or a winner.
Any predictions about the NBA 25 years from now, given what's happened in the last 25 years?
Y'all
Well, I tell you, it's probably going to have. It's so international now. You're probably going to have NBA teams over in Italy, Spain, all over the world, because there's such a huge market to grab onto.
The final will be between Madrid and Beijing.
Yeah. And that's why look at Yao Ming. Look at the money that he brings into the NBA from China. And the sad thing about our kids over here, they think that they're good and they're going to get drafted. But there's approximately, I was reading the other day, I believe there's like 38 foreigners that submitted their names to go in the draft. And most of our kids can't even pronounce these kids' names that's coming over here.
You see the night on TV, San Antonio, they listed the players and the countries, and I believe it was either 9 or 10 countries represented on the San Antonio team this year. Now that tells you a little something about where the league is going.
Yeah.
Now, going back to June 1st, it must have been a good party after the game back there in Landover. Let's hear a little bit about that, and maybe about the arriving at the airport the next day, and then the parade on the day after that, or the following day.
You tell them about the party in the locker room, and I'll tell them about the airplane.
Oh. No, we had a great time. We don't normally discuss parties, but naturally champagne was flowing, and everybody was just totally elated and ecstatic over our victory. And, we had a big party in the ballroom all set up with live music. We had Dave Watkins, had a couple suites set up where we had food and drinks, beer. And to tell you the truth, nobody went to bed that night because we had an early get up. I think we was leaving the airport, leaving the hotel at 7 o'clock in the morning. And we figured,
Were you on that plane, Greg?
I don't remember.
We got the rest of the summer to sleep, so we didn't have to
Let's
worry
hear the
about
last few
playing
seconds.
no more.
Last few
Okay,
seconds of the game. Before you tell your airplane story, let's actually hear the last few seconds of the game. I've got it queued up right here.
97 and 93 on the Bullets call for a timeout. On the inbounds pass, fires in. Ballard, long on top of the key. No good. Rebound, John Johnson. Sonics have it. 7 seconds. 6, 5, 4. Pass to Gus Williams. 3, 2, 1. And the Supersonics win their first ever NBA championship. The ball sails high in the air.
Now you
does the hamburger hop. The Sonics are ecstatic. The horns are honking around the Pacific Northwest. And I'm sure here's a big round of applause from the Washington Bullets fans for both ball clubs, mainly for the Washington Bullets, but for both teams. The last 2 games of this series, simply outstanding ball games. The final score is the Seattle Supersonics win their first ever NBA championship, Seattle 97 and the Washington Bullets 93.
I do have to tell you a real funny story about this, though.
What time you got?
Oh, this story will be very, very, very quick.
I got to be somewhere, boys. What time is it?
It's a
All right, make it quick.
7 minute state. Well, in my business, earlier in my life, I had a broadcasting partner down in Portland who had a real problem with alcohol. And I saw what it had done to a number of people in the radio, there was no television in those years, in the radio business. So I had made an oath to myself that I would never, ever take a drink on the day of, anywhere on the day of when I had to work, be on the air. And I had lived with that all of those years. I never had a drink the day of, before a broadcast or anything. I just wouldn't do it. Now, what happened, we got on the airplane. He mentioned Dave Watkins. And so Dave had lots of champagne on the airplane for all of us. And it was just a great deal. And all the way home. And, of course, the night before, I couldn't really drink too much champagne because I was broadcasting the game. So I figured, okay, it's my time to catch up and really enjoy it. So, I mean, I would finish one glass of champagne after another. And I wasn't really in my cups or anything, but I was feeling pretty good. And 15 minutes before we were going to land, Dave Watkins came to me and he says, Blackburn, he said, I've wired ahead. He said, they said there's a big crowd of people out at the airport. You've got to MC the show coming off the plane. Well, here I had been drinking. I mean, that's the only time I have ever gone on the air with alcohol in me. But
I wish I had tapes of that.
I had nothing to do about it. I mean, I couldn't do anything about it. I had already had all of that champagne, and I said, "Okay, Dave, I'll do it."
And that was a long flight from D.C.
Yeah, but it was fun. The guys came off the plane.
You wouldn't shut up, and that's when we dubbed you the Voice.
No. You dubbed me the Voice in Denver the year before. You and DJ and I were having a bite to eat after a ball game, and you guys were signing autographs, and the people would ask me thinking I was a fat little old guard, and so I would sign my name and I would put Bob Blackburn, Voice of the Sonics. And they looked at me and they said, Voice. That's what we're going to call you from here on. Yes, I know that. I was there. You were drinking that night. You had strong milk.
I tell you what, I'm not looking forward to becoming senile. We've been going at it a few years. You're on the plane, 38,000 up in the air.
He had more champagne than I did that day.
No, but those were the good old days.
Hey, I tell you what, I want you guys to know. I mean, Greg, you probably haven't been privy to this, but JJ and I have a way of insulting each other every time we get together. We have a lot of fun doing it, but we're good friends. I love the guy.
Let's hear Mayor Royer's proclamation. I got that all queued up also.
Charlie?
Before I present the key to the city, I would like to read this proclamation. Whereas the team we honor today is more powerful than a mighty locomotive, and whereas this team is able to leap tall buildings at a single bound, and whereas, most important of all, this team is faster than a whole crowd of speeding bullets, and whereas this team is neither a bird nor a plane, but Supersonics, now, therefore, I, Charles Royer, Mayor of the city, etc., do hereby proclaim Monday, June 4th, as Sonics Day in Seattle.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Are you really sure you want to give me the key to the city?
You know, I have to tell you one other funny story about you remember Gus never showed up for the program downtown after the big parade, but Sam Schulman, the owner of the club, was there, and the governor of the state at that time was Dixie Lee Ray. Do you remember her, Dixie? And so anyway, so Sam had quite a few drinks that morning. And so it came time for him to bring the governor on. And he said, folks, he said, I'd like to bring to the microphone the fine governor of the state of Oregon, Dixie Lee Ray. He got her name just all screwed up, and it was kind of fun, you know, hearing somebody else do it besides me.
I want to say this, and then I got to go, boys. Talking about 25 years since we won a championship. And great of guy as Sam was, I think with Sam getting ready to sell the team, really get into the movie business full-blown, really affected the players, the general managership, the coaching staff, because everybody was looking for security. And Sam was willing. I think that's what made that trade for DJ easy to happen. You know, I think that's why Paul Silas, myself, and pretty soon, and then a year after, Freddie was all gone, because that team, when you have 4 studs like Sigma, Dennis Johnson, Gus Williams, and even Lonnie Shelton, those guys should have played together at least 10 years, the way the Celtics did with Parrish, Bird, and those guys, and McHale. And I think that really put Seattle in a hole.
That would have been more of a dynasty then, maybe.
Wouldn't you
more
say,
championships and more.
Well, I'd agree 100%. I mean, Sam, we maligned him all the time, but Sam was like one of the greatest owners we'll ever see. I mean, he would go out, he would do anything to try to improve his ball club.
Yeah.
He was like a father to everybody. He was also the greatest quote who ever lived. You know, JJ and Paul Silas were great people to talk to. But Sam Shulman would just take off on anything that he was upset about. And the next guy, I think was just looking for a tax write-up.
Yeah.
I don't think he cared a whit about the ball club. I think he was just thinking. So I think some friends kind of talked him into, oh, this is a real treasure in Seattle, Mr. Ackerley, so you should own it. And I don't think he really thought it all the way through, and I think he just bought it on more of a whim than really wanting it.
Yeah, he could care less because, and like Greg said, Sam was very outspoken, but he was very honest. Sam, I don't think Ackley had owned the team over a week, and Sam said, if I would have known he was going to act like this here, I would have never sold him the team. He said in the newspaper. You know, he's very candid.
That's why he got rid of almost everybody on the Sonic Sonic organization. I know. He finally got me. I see a microphone down there.
Yeah, we can take some questions. Let's just. Do you have to leave right now, JJ? Do you have a few minutes?
I got a couple minutes.
Okay. Questions? I want to ask one quick question. What was the Habiger hop before we take an audience question?
Oh, the Habiger hop. Les Habiger had a funny frame. He had
don't twist your
Sorry about that.
No, but what I mean was he was kind of angular, and it actually started down in Phoenix when they won that game down there, and he goes across the floor with his elbows out like this and his knees out like this, hopping along, and that was when I said the Habiger hop. And then he did the same thing after the championship game, and that's where that was.
But it didn't catch on like the Macarena or some of these other dances that other sports have launched.
It wasn't a really dance, I'll tell you that.
Okay, let's get our audience
Would you
question.
let the gentleman talk?
He asked the question. I had to answer.
What sticks in my mind was the UW band and the cheerleaders going around the court in between the third and the fourth quarter, beating those drums and screaming. And we all, you know what we were chanting was the word defense. That whole audience in the Coliseum understood how important that defense was. Here's my question. You nearly won the NBA title with Marvin Webster as your center, and then suddenly he's gone, and then even more suddenly we get Lonnie Shelton given to us. What was the feeling on the team both about losing him? Did you go, oh crap, we're not gonna be able to win the title, we almost won it with him, and then did you go, now wait, we got an awful good player back here?
Well, you know, basically I had mixed emotions. Marvin, at the time, he was a perfect antidote for us because he was a shot blocker center and he could shoot a little 10, 12-footer and had a little jump hook. But he wasn't mentally tough. Physically, he wasn't tough. And, you know, we had to play against Wes Unseld, Elvin Hayes, Mitch Kupchak, another 7-footer. And it was just physical. It was like running into a brick wall every time. And they just beat Jack up so bad you thought he got caught in a fire the first year. Then we got Lonnie, and that gave us opportunity to have Tommy Lagarde at the beginning of the year. Lonnie was coming off the bench. But Lonnie was so physical, and we put Lonnie in the starting lineup, and it made an easy transition for Jack to go from power forward to center. And then once we got to the playoffs, we knew we could play smash mouth basketball, or we could play finesse basketball, because we were able to adjust to any style that we wanted to play with. So, I would say I'm glad we had 60-40. We got Lonnie. Well, at the time, I don't think the NBA was really aware of it, and Lonnie blended in our system perfectly. Just like and Jack Sigma tell you, he's the best power forward you ever played with. And covered his back, but Lonnie was low key. He was young. He wasn't a featured scorer. He wasn't a big name, so to speak. But we knew and appreciated how much he brought to the table.
One more question? Okay. Any other questions after this gentleman? Okay, go ahead. All right.
One of the people I haven't heard you talk about yet this evening is the man who I think was just one of the class coaches and one of the class people in the NBA, Lenny Wilkins. Could any of you talk a little bit about Lenny?
I will, but I think...
Well, Lenny had a way, I think, of getting people to do things without cracking them over the head with an axe handle. Some coaches were just yell and yell and yell. That's Bob Hopkins lost his job because all he did was yell. He may have been a great coach, but he couldn't communicate very well. Lenny was a good communicator, had a way of cajoling people into doing a good job, and yet Lenny had a very strong ego, and if people weren't doing the right thing, he'd make it clear to them. I'm not saying he wouldn't tell them. Some of you may recall that we did a section with Lenny. It was like a small book that appeared at the start of the 78-79 season. The guy is an amazing individual.
Didn't Lenny really challenge you guys, though, in a way to be the best you could be? I mean, didn't he have like he said, have a special way of doing that with you guys?
Yeah. Lenny was, he played in the league a long time, and he was soft-spoken, and he had you prepared to take on any undertaking that was going to be brought to the game that night. And he really relied on input from his assistant coaches, his older players, to pass the word on to the younger guys. And so he was very open with Paul Silas and myself. And, when you got your older guys following the coach's heat, the younger guys, they jump right in line. And so that's what, really brought out the good chemistry. And it got to a point where the only thing Lenny had to do was put on a three-piece suit and walk out on the floor because everybody knew their role and what was supposed to be done.
Didn't you guys have a question?
Is there one? Yeah, one more question down here.
Did you ever play against Dr. J. Julius Erving?
Are you talking to me now? Yeah, I played against him for many years. He was a fantastic player.
What was it like to play against him?
Well, it was like trying to get out of a house that's burning down. No, it was a great challenge for me. And Doc respected me defensively. And when I played against him, I tried to take away his strong suits. He wasn't a great perimeter shooter, but he was a great scorer. And he's one of the few guys that played above the rim all the time. And he had great body control. If he played today, he would probably average 35, 40 points a game.
Dr. J made the greatest shot I've ever seen, and it didn't count. It was in the Kingdom. Maurice Cheeks had the ball in backcourt, was dribbling towards the center court line, and he threw a high lob. Jay had broken away. And he threw a high lob to Dr. J, and Dr. J was going down the right side of the lane, and the ball was over to his right. And he reached over like this and then brought it over his head and dunked it. And it didn't count because Gus Williams stopped just on the other side of the center line, and Maurice Cheeks ran into him for an offensive foul. the greatest shot I've ever seen.
Well,
Any last comments from you guys?
well, I'm just thankful I was a part of it, because those was tremendous fun years, and the city and the fans was very faithful to us and appreciated our workmanship, and it was a good run. It was a great party, and I had the greatest thing of all, I had the opportunity to work with these two guys, and Bob Blackburn and John Foley. It was it went all the way down the line, and I can reveal it now. Was that Blackburn wanted to get me to come out there and for an interview after the game. So John Foley act like he had to escort me out. So John Foley would get a styrofoam cup, he'd get me a beer in it, and he'd get one too. And I said, John, you're on duty. He said, I'm not on duty. This is gravy money. I worked early in the day over the Seattle Center. But he was a great guy. And, we were all blessed to have the opportunity to meet some great people, and all up and down the organization, and it was just a fun deal.
This man here, a great sports writer and a great guy to travel with too, Greg. We enjoyed your company many times.
Well, Bob and I were like a team. We knocked over more restaurants and cafes across the country than anybody I know of.
Let's have a nice big round of applause for Greg Heberlein, Bob Blackburn, and John Johnson, or JJ. Thanks very much. We'll sort of end things with a little cheer from Bill the Beer Man Scott. Maybe you haven't heard of him for many years. I'm not sure where he is these days, but...
Yeah, Bill the Beer Man.
Give me an S! Give me an O! Give me an N! Give me an I! Give me a C! Give me an S! Now tell the whole world who's the world champion!
That's a voice from the past.
Did you guys have anything else you wanted to add? Or?
Well, I'd say that Bill is still mad at me. I wrote a story about Rick the Peanut Man.
Kaminsky, yeah.
Rick Kaminsky, and I didn't write one about Bill the Beer Man. I would point out one other thing in the '78 final when we were when the Sonics didn't make it. Harry Alper was a fellow who handled travel, all the travel stuff for the Sonics. He got the tickets, airplane tickets, and everything together. And in '78, he had a bunch of T-shirts made up. Seattle Sonics, 1978, 77, 78 champions. And of course, they didn't win it. So the next year, when we're in the locker room in Landover, Maryland, after Game 7, Harry comes in and he's got these Sonic championship T-shirts with no date.
Mentioning his name, he was also my statistician on the radio broadcast the night from Landover, Maryland, in the championship game.
Okay. Now, Greg, I understand, speaking of statistics, you played briefly for the Sonics in the early 1970s. Is that true?
Played would be using the word loosely. I worked out with the Sonics for a week when they had a rookie camp in June. Interestingly enough, Lenny was the coach. And at the end of the week, we had 2-a-day drills all week long. And at the end of the week, we played the Portland Trailblazers in the Coliseum. And with about 2.5 minutes to go, one of our team members was Spencer Haywood, who had joined the team in the winter. And Spencer was sitting next to me, and he tapped me on the knee, and he said, "Hey, Lenny wants you." Well, people had seen me, and they knew I was a ringer, and the crowd was occasionally yelling, "Hey, Lenny, put in the little guy." And so finally Lenny decided to put me in. We were up by 13 points. And the moment I came out on the court, they started double and triple teaming me, setting up walls between me and the guy I was supposed to be defending. And our 13-point lead declined to 5 points in 62 seconds. So I was taken out. and we won. Years later, I played Lenny in a game of one-on-one. That was a mistake. One of us had 10, and the other one had 0. I also beat Les Habegger, who fortunately was about 20 years older than I. Yeah, those were my Sonic basketball experiences.
That's your highlight film?
Yeah, that's it.
Anything to add, Bob?
No, not really.
Well, we'll see you back here for the 50th, right, everybody?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Why not?
I'm going to be here.
Well, my wife and I have been married 56 years, 56 years, and we're planning our 75th wedding anniversary party.
Excellent.
We haven't sent out the invitations yet, but...
So June 1st, 2029.
That'll be 21 years from
we'll
now.
Be back here. I'm not sure what day of the week that is, but we'll be back here at MOHAI for another panel discussion.
JJ said something about the maturity of young players and then having to go to a bigger schedule. You know, if you're in high school or college, you're playing 20 to 30 games. You get into the NBA, it's 82 regular season games, 8 to 10 exhibition games, and then maybe 20 playoff games. The Sonics played 17 playoff games in 1979. They won 12 of them. That year they played 102 games. And the season actually lasted 9 months from the day training camp opened till when they finally won the title. And I often think about that. And I think about how young players, I can't imagine how an 18 or 19-year-old could just jump in and do well over a long period of time. I remember how tiring it was for me, and I wasn't playing. In those 9 months, I had 10 days in 9 months when I didn't write a story or call something into the office or check with Frank Furtado, the trainer, to see if Freddie hurt his ankle or, you know, it was grueling just to kind of be on the sidelines. So it's got to be tough for those young guys.
Was that a plum assignment to cover the Sonics that season, or?
Well, yes and no. It was my 4th season, and about midway through the season, because I had one child who had been born like 2 years earlier and a second child on the way, I had decided I wasn't going to do it the next season because you are away so much. You're working nights all the time. You're working weekends all the time. It's really exciting at the game, but everything else is kind of a drudge. So that's what kind of led me away from sports. I had done a lot of stuff. I did the 72 World Series, and I did all kinds of things, but I was glad to move on.
I got to send you guys home with. He told you about his great moment on the basketball court. I do have to tell you really about my one great moment on the basketball court. Fullerton High School, Southern California. I went out for basketball. I wasn't a very good athlete. I'd been quite sick in with tuberculosis in my early childhood. But I went out for the team, and finally, the senior year, after playing a little JV ball, I went out for the varsity. And the coach kind of felt sorry for me, and so he let me be on the squad. And I guess he'd like to have somebody at halftime who, would guard the basketballs and everything like that. But anyway, so they passed out the uniforms, and they only had 11. We had 12 kids on the team. They only had 11 good uniforms from the year before. So he had to go back into to an old supply of uniforms, and the only one he could find was one that a kid who had weighed about 260 pounds had. And so I had to take that, and I took it home, and the shorts were so big that I had my mom, she had to double them over like this, and they had the old elastic and stuff in them. Well, anyway, so for the whole season, I get to guard the basketballs at halftime, and I haven't seen any time on a ball game. We had a championship ball club. In the final game, we were ahead at the end of the third quarter by about 20 points. Well, back in those years, sometimes you scored 25 points, that was the game. But we were ahead by 20 points, and the kids all said, Coach, put Blackburn in, give him a chance, put him in, let him have a little fun. So finally, timeout, he calls, I come from the other end of the bench, he sends me out on the floor. Well, what we didn't realize until that moment, that the elastic that my mom had put in that in those oversized shorts was rotten elastic, and it popped just as I'm approaching the team out on the floor, and my shorts go all the way to my ankles. Now, and as I'm running out there, as the shorts go to my ankles, my foot went over on top of it, so I couldn't, I reached down, and I'm pulling, and I'm trying to pull this thing up, and I'm bent over, and you don't have too much on under those shorts. And the crowd was having a lot of fun, and my cheeks were getting redder and redder, and so was my face. Yeah. And so anyway, finally the coach came out. They gathered the guys around me so I could pull my shorts back up and get them taken care of. And he put his arm around me, and he said, "Blackburn," he said, "that's the best showing you made all year." So anyway, that was the end of my basketball.
Well, that's a perfect note to end our little 25th anniversary panel discussion on. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thanks again to Greg Heberlein and to Bob Blackburn and to John Johnson, or JJ. And do come back to MOHAI sometime. Thanks to TVW for covering this. Again, my name is Feliks Banel. I'm with the Museum of History and Industry here in Seattle. Wishing you all good night.
Thank you for being here.